So today we'll be going over a few cadavers related to the upper limb, and this is what's going to be on the lab quiz number 2. Okay, so starting off here at the posterior side, we have all the muscles at the moment, nothing's been cut. So at the top here, we can see we have the trapezius fibers, these are the upper fibers, and we have the middle fibers of the traps, and then the lower fibers of the traps. Over here, this line right here, where number 8 is pointing out, that is the spine of the scapula. Okay. Over here is the lat dorsi. You probably don't need to know these muscles up here, but just in case they get tagged, just so you know. This muscle right here, which is covered by the trapezius, is going to be your rhomboid major. We're going to see that in a few seconds. This big muscle over here, which is inserting on the medial intertubercular groove of the humerus, is your teres major muscle. This muscle right above it with the aponeurosis still intact is the teres minor, and you can sort of see like the shape right here, and that's going to insert on the lower facet of the greater tubercle of the humerus. It's going to be involved in some lateral rotation and some weak adduction. Up here is the infraspinatus muscle with the aponeurosis still intact. We're going to be able to see it a bit more clear in a few minutes. This is your deltoid muscle, so this would be the deltoid posterior fibers. This would be the lateral fibers, and then anterior, it'll be the anterior fibers, which we'll see later. This muscle right here that's going into this space is your triceps long head, and this is going to insert on the infraglenoid tubercle. This would be your triceps lateral head because it's more lateral to the midline of the body. And then this would be the medial head of your triceps. Okay, now that the trapezius has been flipped, it's been reflected, we can look a little bit more intrinsically. So this is the infraspinatus muscle. We see that the aponeurosis has been reflected. So, it's just been cut. This is your deltoid muscle, once again. This is your triceps still. This is the teres major. And you can see how it's significantly bigger than the teres minor muscle here. And this is the infraspinatus. What's different now is that we can see the whole rhomboid major, and we can also see the rhomboid minor. And we see the difference between the rhomboids is that the rhomboids is going to attach on the medial portion of the scapula, because this is the spine of the scapula, remember? And it's going to attach itself on the vertebral column from C7 to T5, right? C7 all the way to T5. This is the supraspinatus muscle, which makes sense because it's right above the infraspinatus muscle. Right on top there. And then this muscle up here, what do you think it is? The levator scapula. Levator scapula muscle. That's going to elevate the scapula, hence the name. This once again is your medial fibers of the triceps brachii. This is the lateral. And then this is your long head of the triceps. Okay, so we are still in the posterior view of the back. And if we start at the top, this is our splenius capitis muscle. Right over here, it's hard to see, but this is your sternocleidomastoid, number 2. This is the trapezius that's been reflected. Now, this is still trapezius all the way down here. This is latissimus dorsi. Okay. Over here, this angle right here is the angle between your medial border of the scapula and the lateral border of the scapula. We call it the inferior angle. Okay. And we could see that there's the teres major that extends outwards laterally, and also teres minor that's right on top, this whole muscle right here. And then this is the infraspinatus muscle. Right on top is the supraspinatus. This is the spine of the scapula. Okay. These are your lateral supraclavicular nerves. This is your rhomboid minor muscle, and this is your rhomboid major muscle. This is the levator scapula. I'm not sure if I said that. I may have said that already. And this is your deltoid muscle that's reflected. This once again is the long head of the triceps brachii. This is the triceps brachii muscle. And they all converge onto the olecranon process and they form a tendon. And that's where they all converge together. Okay, so we're going to shift our focus anteriorly now. And we'll start at the top. This is your trapezius muscle. We could see it from the front. This is going to be the anterior fibers of the deltoid. This is going to be the lateral fibers of the deltoid, and they're all going to insert onto the deltoid tuberosity. This big muscle in the middle here is your pectoralis major. This would be your clavicle. This is the acromion, the scapula. This over here is your manubrium. This is the body of the sternum, and this is the xiphoid process. This is the sternocleidomastoid, these two muscles here. Let's go a little bit lower. This muscle right here, you see how there's a split? This is the serratus anterior muscle. It's going to go medial to the scapula. It's innervated by the long thoracic nerve. And then over here is the external obliques. So these are going to be useful for when we're doing forceful expiration, right? To compress and to flex the trunk. Let's move to the arm. Number 11 here, this is your brachialis muscle. It's a synergist to the biceps brachii, which is right here. This is the long head of the biceps brachii. This is going to the supraglenoid tubercle of the humerus, in between the bicipital groove. And then you have the long head of the biceps brachii, which is going to the coracoid process of the scapula. Okay, so this is another view here. We have the pectoralis major that's been cut and reflected, and if we follow the fibers, we can see that this portion right here still belongs to this muscle, so this will still be the pectoralis major. This is the body of the sternum, okay, sternocleidomastoid. The muscle that is deep to the pectoralis major is the pectoralis minor, and we can see that it attaches on the ribs 2 to 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. On the inside here, you have the coracobrachialis, and you see a few nerves, or a nerve specifically that will go and insert through this. Is the musculocutaneous nerve, which innervates the anterior arm. A little bit lateral to it, you have the long head, you have the short head of the biceps, and they're both going to attach on the coracoid process of the scapula. You have the long head of the bicep, and this is the deltoid muscle right here. It's attaching on the deltoid tuberosity, and once again, this is the brachialis muscle. This muscle right here, we didn't talk about before. This is the subclavius muscle. It is right here, below the clavicle. Subclavius. And this is the acromion and the spine of the scapula as well. We're moving more lateral to the arm, and we can see up here, this is the lateral fibers of the deltoid muscle. This is the posterior fibers of the deltoid muscle, and these are the anterior fibers of the deltoid muscle. This over here, it's a little difficult to know, but this is the deltopectoral groove. It's where the cephalic vein is going to go into and connect with the axillary vein to then merge into the subclavian vein. Okay, let's go a little bit more downwards, and we're going to see that this is the this is the biceps brachii. This muscle right here. This muscle is the brachialis muscle, synergist to the biceps brachii, and this muscle right here is the brachioradialis, and the one underneath it is the extensor carpi radialis muscle. The muscle in the back would be the triceps brachii. This would be the tendon of the triceps brachii, and this is the olecranon. Okay, so now we've taken off a few layers from the front. This is an anterior view once again. So let's begin with this big, obvious muscle here. This is the subscapularis, and I know it's not so evident, but this is the latissimus dorsi. Right here, it's been cut, of course. This muscle right here would be the rhomboid major. It would go towards the vertebral column. Okay, this artery here is the axillary artery. This is a scapula that's been cut. A clavicle that's been cut. So clavicle axillary artery. Now, if you look here, this is our deltoid muscle, lateral anterior fibers. This right here, we said it before, it's the deltopectoral groove. This is the long head of the biceps brachii, or it could be both. I believe it's both, the long and short head right here. This over here, yeah, so this over here is the long head of the triceps. And number 9 here is pointing to the brachialis muscle, which is deep to the biceps brachii. Number 10 is the brachioradialis. 16 is the tendon of the biceps brachii, and then it becomes the bicipital aponeurosis is what we call it. We can see that we have an artery and a vein here. An artery and a nerve. The nerve is going to be the median nerve, and the artery is going to be the brachial artery, which is then going to split into radial and ulnar artery. This muscle right here is the pronator teres muscle. And I believe that is all for this slide. Okay, so over here, let's begin by what we know. So this looks like a cut biceps brachii. So this is deep to the biceps brachii. This would be the brachialis muscle. This would be the distal portion of the biceps, of bicep brachii. This again would still be the brachioradialis muscle. Apologies. If we go back higher up, this muscle here, it's going to the same place that the short head of the biceps brachii would go to, which is the coracoid process of the scapula. So then this would be your coracobrachialis muscle, and this would be the tendon of the short head of the biceps brachii. This would be your deltoids, clavicle, subscapularis, and weirdly enough, this would be your teres major muscle right here. This would be the long head of the triceps, and this would be the medial portion of the tricep. So this would be the long head of the biceps brachii, and it's going to go to the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. And the one on the right side, the more medial side, this is going to be the short head of the biceps brachii, and that's going to attach on the coracoid process of the scapula. And we can see here that there's this fibrous sheath that's going to connect the coracoid process and the acromion of the scapula. We call it the coracoacromial ligament. Now we're going to start talking about the forearm. This is a little bit more complicated because we're given a pronated arm. So it shouldn't be too hard to distinguish, but we'll start off slow. So at the top, this is the biceps brachii. Okay. And we can imagine that this artery passing through here would be the brachial artery. This is the pronator teres, and we see that the brachial artery passes through the cubital fossa. Remember, you're on the anterior side, and that's going to split into the radial artery, and it's going to split into the ulnar artery. Okay, so this big muscle on the side is the brachioradialis, because we know it's on the thumb side. And now imagine your hand was in the anatomical position. The first muscle you would have from the medial epicondyle, because that's where most flexor muscles begin at the forearm, at the medial epicondyle. You'd have your pronator teres. Right after that, you would have your flexor carpi radialis muscle. And after that, you would have the palmaris longus muscle, and you can see that this is the palmaris longus muscle because if you follow it, you hit the tendon of the palmaris longus muscle, and you could see that it goes into the palmar aponeurosis. In the middle of that, you have the flexor digitorum superficialis, and that's going to go 2 digits 2 to 4. And then your most lateral would be your flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. And once again, this is the ulnar artery, and that's the radial artery. Let's go more towards the hand. This is going to be your abductor pollicis brevis muscle, right here. And this muscle here is going to be your flexor pollicis brevis. So the abductor pollicis brevis is a little bit more, I would say, lateral. And the flexor pollicis brevis would be a little bit more towards the inside of the palm. Okay, so abductor pollicis brevis and flexor pollicis brevis. If we look towards the pinky side, we have over here, this is the abductor digiti minimi muscle. Okay, and this muscle here would be the palmaris brevis muscle. So palmaris brevis muscle and abductor digiti minimi muscle. This is abductor pollicis brevis and flexor pollicis brevis. Also, I wanted to mention that number 9 here is referring to the tendon of the abductor pollicis longus muscle over here. Okay, so this is a little bit of a mess, so let's break it down slowly. Let's start from the top. This is the biceps brachii. This is the brachialis muscle in between. I would say this is the pronator teres. This is the brachioradialis muscle. And this right here is your triceps brachii muscle up in this corner here. This would be the medial epicondyle. So this is the medial side, right? Because it's the pinky. And then we just go a little bit further down. This would be the bicipital aponeurosis, coming from the tendon of the biceps brachii. It makes sense. And over here, the flexor carpi ulnaris and the palmaris longus muscle have been cut. It's to better reflect the flexor digitorum superficialis. This is the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris. Over here, in between the brachioradialis and the flexor carpi radialis, you have flexor pollicis longus, I believe. Yes, flexor pollicis longus. And if we just go further down, so we said this was the flexor pollicis brevis, then we have the abductor pollicis brevis, abductor pollicis brevis, flexor pollicis brevis. We also have the same thing on the pinky side. So this is going to be your flexor digiti minimi brevis. And this muscle over here is going to be your abductor digiti minimi muscle. Okay. Now, these tendons that you see here, if you pay attention closely, you can see that they're coming from the flexor digitorum superficialis, which is what these tendons are. And this is the carpal tunnel underneath. We call it carpal tunnel. That's where a lot of nerves, arteries, veins, tendons pass through. Okay, so one more time. This is flexor carpi radialis. This is brachioradialis. This is flexor pollicis longus. This is flexor digitorum superficialis. All of these muscles here. This is your palmaris longus that's been cut, and this is your flexor carpi ulnaris. Okay, so this is a similar picture as the one before, except now we're going a little bit more deep. And as we can see that number 40 right here, what it's pointing at, it's showing us that this is the flexor digitorum profundus muscle. And how do we know? Is that if we follow it, we could see where it's going, and it's going underneath here. See, we're following these tendons, and we see that they go underneath the flexor digitorum superficialis tendons. And something weird happens here. We could see that the flexor digitorum superficialis tendons, they split onto the sides of the digits 2 to 5, and that the FDP is going to travel through this split. And you can see that very clearly on this picture. It's pretty much what I wanted to illustrate on this picture. Number 38 is the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. Number 21 is the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. It's been cut. Number 9 is the tendon of the abductor pollicis longus muscle. And 13 here, we spoke about this before. This is the flexor pollicis brevis muscle, and the one higher up here is the abductor pollicis brevis. This nerve here that you see, this tendon here, this is the tendon of the flexor pollicis longus muscle, right? And that's coming up from this muscle right here. You can see how it converges and comes here. This is the flexor pollicis longus muscle. Okay, now we're looking at a very deep view. So let's orient ourselves one more time. Okay, so at the top here, we have the biceps brachii. This is the brachialis muscle. This is the triceps brachii. Okay, as we go down, this is the pronator teres muscle. All the way lateral here, we have the brachioradialis muscle. And this bone that you see right here, this is the radius. And the bone that you see here is the ulna. You have a solid joint in the middle. We call it the interosseous membrane. And this is a membrane here that transfers forces between radius and ulna. 17, over here, this muscle is called the pronator quadratus, and as you can imagine, it's responsible for pronating the forearm. Okay. So let's continue distal to the arm, to the elbow joint. This 8 here, this is called your opponens, and this is the tendon of the abductor pollicis longus muscle. If you have an abductor pollicis longus, you have the abductor pollicis brevis over here, and you also have this muscle here, which is your flexor pollicis brevis as well. Because remember, you have the flexor pollicis longus that comes up. You don't see it here, but I could show you right here. This is the flexor pollicis longus. Okay. If we continue now on the hand, this muscle here is called your adductor pollicis. Adductor pollicis. We're still in the anterior forearm, by the way. Adductor pollicis. And this tendon that we have here, this is from the tendon of the flexor pollicis longus muscle. Okay. Alright, now let's go to the other side. We have abductor digiti minimi muscle, and we have the flexor digiti minimi brevis. And once again, we could see the tendons of the flexor digitorum profundus right here. They're going underneath the tendons of the flexor digitorum superficialis, and they're going in between. This tendon here is the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris, And this tendon here is the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. Okay, so here we're still on the anterior surface of the elbow joint. Okay, so this is the humerus. This is the median nerve that's going to travel into the cubital fossa. This is the brachial artery. And this tendon right here, it's the tendon of the biceps brachii. Okay. This muscle here is the supinator muscle, and this muscle here is the pronator teres muscle. Okay, if we go down, this is the insertion of the radius and insertion of the pronator teres muscle. Okay. Okay, what else do we have here? This bone here is the ulna. So we could see that, we could deduce at least that if this is the ulna bone, that means that the arm here, the forearm, is pronated. That's why the supinator is in this position. This is the radius bone right here. And the 9, this membrane that you see here, this is the interosseous membrane. This is the deep branch of the radial nerve to the extensor muscles. This is the trochlea of the humerus. This is the capitulum of the humerus. And what else do we have here? This is triceps brachii. This is the anterior portion of the humerus, and this is sort of a pronated view. In this picture, we have the posterior view of the pronated arm. So let's just start from the top, make sure we're situated properly. This muscle right here is the brachioradialis. This is going to be the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Okay. In the back here is the olecranon, and number 5 is the anconeus muscle. If we switch back over to the front, this muscle right here is going to be extensor carpi radialis longus. This muscle below it is going to be extensor carpi radialis brevis. And now we see that this muscle here, it has 2 muscle bellies. We're going to call this muscle extensor digitorum for the extensor of the wrist. And then the muscle below it, we're going to call it extensor digiti minimi. Why? Because if we follow it, we see that it's going towards the pinky. And then the last muscle, the most medial muscle, you could say, is extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. Extensor carpi ulnaris muscle, right over here. This muscle over here is your abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, and then this is extensor pollicis longus muscle. Okay, so one more time, this is your abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, and right over here, this is the tendon of the extensor pollicis longus. And you can think of this like a sandwich. You have the longus, the brevis, and the longus. Number 19 is both the tendons of the extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis muscles. And we saw that this is extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. Okay, and let's go towards the hand. We could see that number 11 is the extension of the tendons of the extensor digitorum. Okay, we see how they go from digits 2 to 5. And I believe they're going to go all the way to the DIP, the distal interphalangeal joints. And it's going to be flexion as well. Okay, and I believe we're finished with this slide over here. Oh, one more thing. Number 20. This, if we follow this, this muscle in between here is extensor indicis, but we can't really see it too well, and that's going to go to your second digit, and it's going to extend it. This is the tendon of it. Okay, so this is another posterior view. A few more layers of muscles have been cut, so we can reorient ourselves once again. So at the top, 11 is going to be your biceps brachii muscle, and then in between is the brachialis muscle, and then we're going to go a little bit more down. It's going to be the brachioradialis muscle. Number 1 is the triceps brachii. Number 2, we don't need to know that. This is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Number 4 is the anconeus muscle. Okay. Number 5, it's cut, but we can imagine that it's going to be covering the posterior surface, so this muscle is going to be the extensor digitorum, but it's cut, so that's okay. I don't think we'll get asked on that. Number 6, we see that the supinator muscle is deep to the extensor digitorum. On the left side here, towards the pinky, is the extensor carpi radialis muscle. Yep. And if we go to the right side, number 14, this is your extensor carpi radialis longus. And then a little bit more towards the posterior aspect is your extensor carpi radialis brevis. And we saw this in the slide before, except now we could see the muscle. This muscle is the abductor pollicis longus, right? I'm going to abduct the thumb. And this is the extensor pollicis longus. And then you have the extensor pollicis brevis in between here. Okay. What else can we see? We could see the extensor indicis, right? It's going to go to the second digit. We could also see the extensor retinaculum, which is going to wrap around this wrist right here. Okay. These digits right here, these tendons that we see over here, these are the tendons of the extensor digitorum muscle. Number 9 is showing us the third and fourth dorsal interossei muscles between the metacarpals. 21 is the first dorsal interossei muscle. And with that, I believe we've covered everything on this side. Now we have a picture of the hand. This is a lateral view of the hand. So starting at number 1, what we can see here are the tendons of the extensor pollicis brevis and abductor pollicis longus muscles. Okay, and if we follow down, we could see that at 13, this is the tendon of the extensor pollicis brevis, right over here, and this would be the tendon of the extensor pollicis longus. Number 10 is the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. This would be your anatomical stuff box or snuff box, whatever the teacher calls it. Number 12 would be the tendon of the abductor pollicis longus. Okay, so you have abductor pollicis longus, you have extensor pollicis brevis, and then you have extensor pollicis longus. Okay. Number 14 would be the tendon of the abductor pollicis brevis muscle, which is right next to the abductor pollicis longus. If we look at number 5, we spoke about this just before. These are the first dorsal interosseous muscle. Number 6 is the tendon of the extensor digitorum muscle. It's been cut. If we look up here at number 4, this is the tendons of the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis muscles. And let's look distally at the fingertips. So we could imagine that this tendon right here is going to be the tendons for the flexor digitorum superficialis, And the tendon that would go more distally would be the tendons for the flexor digitorum profundus. Okay, and that pretty much covers everything we did on the slide. Um, you can also look at the sides here. These are the tendons for the lumbricals. They're going to attach on the sides and on the other side as well. Okay, so this is a lot to unpack here. Let's start off at the top. Let's orient ourselves. So this is the anterior portion of the hand. And let's start off at number 10. This is the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. Okay. And if that's the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis, then number 32, we would expect it to be the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. Okay. All right, let's continue. What do we have here? Okay, this location here, where 31 is pointing at, that's going to be the position of the carpal tunnel. This is where we're going to have all of the contents flow through. Let's switch our focus over to this muscle here. This is the opponens pollicis muscle, and this is going to be the opponens digiti minimi muscle. This right here. Right here. Opponens digiti minimi. Why? Because of the pinky. And this is just going to be the opponens pollicis muscle. I'm assuming because it's close to the thumb. Or palm. One or the other. I am not too sure at this point. Alright. 24 is the abductor pollicis brevis muscle. 25 is the flexor pollicis brevis muscle. 26 is the oblique head of the adductor muscle. And 27 is the transverse head of adductor pollicis muscle. So this is the oblique head of the adductor pollicis muscle, and this is the transverse head of the adductor pollicis muscle. Okay, let's continue. 28 is the tendon of the flexor pollicis longus muscle. Flexor pollicis longus muscle. Alright, what else do we have here? Number 38. This is the second palmar interosseous muscle, if I'm not mistaken. Correct. And 39 is the third palmar interosseous muscle. And 40 is the fourth dorsal interosseous muscle. That is just more posterior as opposed to the palmar interosseous muscles. This muscle right here would be your, I would like to say, your flexor digiti minimi brevis muscle. Number 36. Flexor digiti minimi brevis, this muscle right here. And this would be your abductor digiti minimi muscle. No brevis for this one. Okay, and once again, the tendons, so number 42 is pointing to the tendons of the flexor digitorum profundus. It's going underneath. And number 43 is pointing to the tendons of the flexor digitorum superficialis. And how do we know? It's because we see the split here. And then you have the FDP that's going further down. So at first glance, this is a big mess, but we're going to zoom in and we're going to try and decipher this as best as we can. So, I don't know. Let's just start with number 10 here. This is the thoracoacromial artery. And we know that the thoracoacromial artery is going to supply the pectoralis muscles, it's going to supply the deltoids, it's going to supply the clavicle as well as the acromion of the scapula. Then if we go down here, number 37, that is your lateral thoracic artery. And this artery is going to go supply the serratus anterior muscle. Okay. Let's go down to 36. 36 is going to be the supreme intercostal artery. I don't know if we spoke about that in the lecture. If we didn't, then don't need to know it. 34, I believe this is the thoracodorsal artery, which comes off of the suprascapular artery. Subscapular artery, my apologies. Because we know that the subscapular artery gives rise to the circumflex scapular artery as well as the thoracodorsal. So this is the subscapular artery and this is the thoracodorsal artery. Okay. I'm assuming this big piece here, number 4, that is the axillary artery. And we see that this is going to become the brachial artery. Okay, this is your biceps brachii right over here. Okay, and this nerve here looks like it's piercing a muscle, and we know that the musculocutaneous nerve is the one that pierces the coracobrachialis, and this is the coracobrachialis muscle, so that is the musculocutaneous nerve. That is number 3. And this is our pectoralis minor. Okay, so what else can we decipher here? This, number 2, this would be the anterior circumflex humeral artery, and underneath it's going to the posterior, so that would be the posterior circumflex humeral artery. Alright, so anterior circumflex humeral artery, posterior circumflex humeral artery, it's going behind the surgical neck of the humerus. Okay, let's continue. What else can we find? Number 6, this is pointing to an artery that's going posterior to the arm. What artery do we know goes posterior to the arm? That is the profunda brachii artery, which is going to supply the posterior compartment of the arm. Okay, so let's see what we can do now. Now let's move more towards the middle. This big artery here, this would be your right subclavian artery. The right subclavian artery, and then this would be the brachiocephalic trunk, and this would be the ascending aorta. Okay, so ascending aorta, brachiocephalic trunk, we're going to the right side. We know that the subclavian forms a venous angle with there's an internal jugular somewhere, but I can't seem to find it at the moment. It's okay. Number 15, this muscle here is the anterior scalene muscle. Okay, number 14 is the transverse cervical artery, which branches off of the no, my apologies, it does not branch off of that. It should branch off the thyrocervical, I believe, but I cannot seem to find that at the moment. Okay, what else can we find? 13 is, this is a brachial plexus. Number 11 is the suprascapular artery. Okay, we said that number 14 was the transverse cervical artery. What else can we find? 16 is the right internal carotid artery. 17 is the external carotid artery. We don't need to know that though. 18 is the carotid sinus. Don't need to know that either. 20 is the right common carotid artery. Don't need to know that either. Okay, it's pretty much most of the stuff that we need to know on this slide. 24, this is the internal thoracic artery, and that branches off of the subclavian artery, right? Because we said vitamin C and D, so the vertebral artery, internal thoracic, thyrocervical, costocervical, right? And dorsal scapular, but I can't seem to find those at the moment. A little difficult. I believe that should be most of the stuff. Oh, there we go. Where was 38? This is your thyrocervical trunk. And we could see that it's giving rise to the transverse cervical arteries as well as the suprascapular artery, which makes sense because they both come from that branch. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Let's just break it down a little more simple. Let's look for something that really pops out. We could see that there's an M over here. This M represents the, if you say the mnemonic, remember to drink cold beer, it represents the chords. Okay, so these would be the chords right here, and these would be the terminal branches of the chords. Okay, so in the middle you have the median nerve. Number 8 is the median nerve. Lateral to it, you're going to have the musculocutaneous nerve. And if you travel up, you're going to have the lateral cord, which makes sense. Over here, number 7, this is going to be the axillary nerve. And that makes sense because if you travel up, you're going to be in the posterior cord. And number 10 is the radial nerve. That also makes sense because you could see how that's coming underneath, which is also coming from the posterior cord. Now, we said this was the median nerve. So then this cord over here, that's coming here, number 18, this is the medial cord of the plexus. All right. So 21, if this is the medial cord and it's going down, this should be your ulnar nerve. And then more medial to that, this nerve over here, number 22. This is your medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. And then more medial to that, you have number 23. This is the thoracodorsal nerve. Okay. And we have an artery, this artery right here, this is the subclavian artery because it hasn't yet passed the clavicle, so it's still above. Once it passes the clavicle, it's going to be known as the axillary artery. And then if we follow it, we could see that it goes all the way down here, and at this point, once it passes the teres major, it's now known as the brachial artery. This nerve running down here, this is the long thoracic nerve, and we know that innervates the serratus anterior with the lateral thoracic artery. Do not get that confused. Okay, let's just follow the cords back up. We could see that 13 is pointing to a few roots. These are the roots to the brachial plexus, C5 to T1. Okay, and from class, we learned that the dorsal scapular nerve comes off of the roots, and we can see that right here with number 2, which is the dorsal scapular nerve. And we also learned that the suprascapular nerve will come off the trunks, which is right here. And that's going to innervate the supra and the infraspinatus muscle. Okay. Did I miss anything? 14 is the phrenic nerve. It's difficult to know that. 15 is the transverse cervical artery. Difficult to know as well. And we said that number 3 is the suprascapular nerve, and number 2 is the dorsal scapular artery. I may have said nerve before. This is the dorsal scapular artery. Apologies for that if I said that wrong.